My lips are dry. Friday.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New York City Coalition for Educating Families conversation on community safety and school safety. With us tonight, we have Crystal Garrant from the Sandy Hook Promise Organization Foundation. And tonight, I am going to pass the microphone to our very own Jennifer Goddard to take this thing away. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Farah. I'm Jennifer Goddard, Vice President of Communications for New York City SEFT, and I'm very excited to welcome our special guest this evening, Crystal Garrant, who is the Chief Program Officer for Sandy Hook Promise, which, as I'm sure everyone here is aware, is a transformative advocacy powerful group, powerful message about gun violence, stopping gun violence, and knowing the signs. And, you know, they have, since the awful tragedy of December of 2012, have created programming that has impacted 18 million participants through their programming. They've had 23,000 schools engaged, and this is all thanks to the hard work of our special guest this evening. And I'm so grateful to welcome you. And I look forward to a really, hopefully, conversation this evening about what we can do to ensure safe schools and prevent gun violence. So thank you. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Farah, thank you so much for setting this up. Amy, thank you, NYC CEFT, for all you do to advocate and to inspire change. Again, my name is Crystal Garrant, bringing greetings and appreciation for opening this space and appreciation from the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation team, a group of dedicated and hardworking 100-some-odd folks who every single day focus on a singular mission to end school shooting and create a culture change that prevents violence. Very simple. So I'm here on behalf of our co-founders and our CEOs, Mark Barden and Nicole Hockley, who soon after December 14th, nearly 10 years ago, after losing their babies, said, what can they do as individual people to be individual citizens and organize, right? And those are the ties that bind, right? We organize in different contexts, in different cities, in different places. And while the conditions are different, right? This feeling of being human and the loss that Mark and Nicole felt, but they channeled that into transformation. So again, I would be remiss if I did not honor the shoulders that I get a privilege to speak on from such a tragic event nearly 10 years ago. So again, we are a violence prevention organization. We imagine a future, again, where young people are not normalized to shootings, to acts of violence, to losing their friends, right? Losing their loved ones in schools, homes, and communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the urgency of now, and I'm not going to get into any complex facts, right? Just having this human conversation. So just, last week, we heard about the school shooting, right? In the Midwest, right? Which seems so very far away from New York City, the tri-area. I'm in Atlanta, seems so far. But when you have a child, right, who goes to school every day, when a school shooting happens, you can't help but to say, how much more can we take, right? And so there are constant reminders about the work that we have to do together within geographical locations and, quite frankly, across the nation. And so we know, right, no matter where we come from, that when young people don't feel safe, and I'm using that broadly, when they go to school and they see a homicide and a crime scene, when they go to school and they experience bullying, when they go to school and they experience other acts of violence, or when they're exposed to their friends telling them they want to end their life. When young people are interacting with those experiences, they can't learn, right? And so this focus on positive outcomes has to equally focus on how do we design systems for safety. There's a lot of debate about what that might look like, but our work is very much about prevention on a couple of different levels. And so we partner with school districts to support school districts with their own goals around safety. You know, many schools want to reduce the incidences of bullying. Many schools want to make sure that young people have an opportunity to practice empathy and feel connection. And so whatever school districts want to get done for young people around prevention, around safety, around social emotional development, we support them in doing that. When we think about our educators, those on the front lines who are faced with a number of priorities to the benefit of whole child development, we help educators understand how to be trusted adults and how to support young people in instituting this like upstander, not bystander, upstander agency activism. When we think about students themselves, we want students to know the signs. We want students to rally around each other. We want students to practice agency. And so when we think about our program, it is very much about supporting the systems that support kids, right? And so not just a program in a classroom or one training in a classroom or one training, but working with school districts and the community partners that they work with. For us, we know that there are a range of reasons why violence exists, why violence concentrates in certain communities. And New York City, Bronx is no different. There are some social factors, the things that we don't see, right? We always talk about this iceberg. So we see the impact, we see the violence and the headlines, but there are things that sit underneath it. And we know as a national organization, when we partner with districts, we are trying to understand what sits underneath the surface. Because it's that, like when you talk about organizing and bringing community together, this topic of violence can be approached from addressing poverty, right? This topic can be addressed by thinking about housing inequity. There's so many factors that surround our kids, and then we see violence at the above the water. And so as we work with communities and as we start a partnership with Bronx Community School District 9, what we are trying to do is understand what are the things that the Bronx is dealing with, and how do we, in the bounds of our programming, upstream prevention, working with districts, with educators, with youth, how can we partner on being a solution to violence prevention, knowing that we are one aspect of a very complex and deeply seated challenge in communities. There are some important things that I wanted to highlight because I think your organization embodies them in your spirit there. I could feel that from the first conversation I had with you, in that, you know, schools are one dimension, right? But they're a dimension that touch so many parts of a child's ecosystem and their lived experience. I spoke about community-based organizations, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't honor the importance of how community-based organizations bring people together, facilitate healing, facilitate reconciliation. And we know that, we understand that as critical to violence prevention. And then when we think about parents and caregivers, I mean, they're our partners, right? They are our partners in doing the work, and what we want to do is listen to parents and caregivers and understand that what's concerning them about their young people regarding violence prevention. And so it's something that we're very interested in and learning from you all in the context of New York City broadly, and then the Bronx in particular. I've been talking for almost 10 minutes. I'm gonna stop because I'm sure there's a question. But I think as Sandy Hook Promise continues to partner with school districts, we are committed to figuring out how young people are normalizing a context that is not normal, right? We know that there are some unwritten codes and culture around not saying something, or there are legitimate reasons that young people feel like they cannot. And we want to partner with all of those dimensions, right? And youth are like, they're not at the top, but they're right in center, on figuring out what are the norms, cultural norms around violence, and how do we push through those things, right? In a way that builds skill and confidence and safety to say something. Because what we know, we have seen our math, our literacy outcomes decrease. We are all urgently concerned. But if we also don't create spaces for young people to face what they're feeling and talk about what they're feeling and how that is getting in the way of their learning, we are not going to do what we need to do for young people. And that is have schools that are safe, right? Not just what adults think is safe, but young people, a sense of felt safety, a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, because that is necessary to have the type of academic transformation that we need. And we are very much willing and wanting to partner with school districts across the country. Okay, last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to stop for the question. We are very excited. We are very honored to be at the very beginnings of a partnership, again, with the Bronx Community School District 9. So I want to thank Harry and Deputy Jasmine, Superintendent Sherman for all that they're doing to set forth a vision of this partnership. And for us, it's not business as usual. It is really understanding the context of what's keeping young people up and how we can partner around their safety objectives in a meaningful way. So with that, I will stop and see what questions there are so we can engage in some conversation.
Well, thank you for that, Crystal. So I'm wondering, in terms of being a national organization, what are some of the things that you have discovered that we can assume are commonalities when it comes to children engaging in violent behavior?
Yeah, I think one of the commonalities is the access to mental health supports. So, obviously we're seeing shortages of counselors in schools. We are looking at the data, and we're looking at some interesting trends in terms of there is a high need for mental health services and a very limited pool in terms of how those services are accessed. And so that as being quite concerning as we think about young people who are exhibiting concerning behavior. We are also seeing young people, so we have a national crisis center, and we have the Say Something Anonymous reporting system. Traditionally, we have third-party tips where young people are sharing their concerns around concerning behavior or threats. We are starting to see young people themselves report directly and say that they are concerned about their own mental health and their own well-being. I think the other piece here is there's this interesting conversation between, what does it mean to be prepared and what does it mean to provide the right sets of skills. And so we're trying to help districts think about, preparedness and prevention and kind of some of the different practices that exist. The last thing is I can't underestimate the power of young people. They're asking to create a space. They're asking to be partners in the solution. And we have our Youth Advisory Board, National Youth Advisory Board, and our Safe Promise clubs. And these are small leadership clubs who really take this issue and start to carry the messages forward in school, in communities. They organize different experiences. And so we're seeing, again, obviously, young people wanting to be partners, and not that adults are doing something to them, but that adults are doing something with them in this work.
Thank you for that. We have, okay, Carla, would you please promote Ellen for me? She would like to ask a direct questions concerning violence and special needs, students in schools. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Ellen. The floor is yours.
Hi.
Thank you for this. This is my concern. Many times adults, people misread the reactions of children with autism or developmental delays or ADHD. And even more often, they rarely practice how to handle a child who may be having an emotional meltdown, not only because he or she is scared, but because he or she has autism. So how do the plans include kids like this? And how do the plans address, in New York City, we have an anomaly, District 75, there are 60 self-contained schools. How do the plans address those schools and the people, the staff and children within those schools?
Yeah. Ellen, thank you for the question. So a couple of things. One, when we work with educators, we talk to them about being a trusted adult. And there are a lot of concepts that we talk about it. But we talk about the need to differentiate the response. So there's not kind of 5 responses that then you apply to the general population, because there are a lot of nuances for building a trusted adult. And so we spend a lot of time in that space for educators. I think what you also are highlighting is that when we're a national organization, and so when we partner with a local district, it's critical to bring others who are experts in particular spaces so that there is a shared approach, so that the programs and the training are not incongruent with the supports that are in place for young people who are special needs or have different developmental abilities. And so we're very attuned to that. And so when I talked about we partner at the district level, the educator level, and the student level, part of that conversation when we're working with the district is understanding, to your point, what happens, what are the supports in place for certain types of young people, to make sure that we have coordination in how these practices come together. What I would say is that because we're very focused on social and emotional skill building, it's promotion across the board, right? And so we're promoting skills around reducing social isolation, about connection and empathy, and that includes all young people. And so we, even in our design of our trainings and our programs, are making sure that we are inclusive in that message, and by virtue of that, the practices that are in the educator trainings in particular. But I do want to underscore that, Ellen, your statement is a call to action, particularly as we have policies in place around safety that may isolate certain populations and groups of young people, and we need to have that conversation.
Ellen, does that sound good to you, or would you like to follow up with something else? Okay, I don't know if she can.
Farah, yeah.
Yes.
You know, I never shut up, but the thing is, so many of our children are children without language. or deaf or blind. And I know I'm beating a dead horse, but many educators, even in buildings where there are co-located programs, many educators never cross the divide. Educators stay on their side of the building. And it just worries me to no end that these kids would be poorly treated or dismissed, and their concerns, while not expressed in the same manner as their general ed peers, are not often addressed by the adults in the room. I don't mean to sound depressing, it's just worrying.
No, Ellen, you're bringing the reality, right? And I think, and that's just it. I mean, I think that's the urgency, right? We have a lot of really good programs out there, but without the deep work about application and understanding what's happening, we may have a mismatch. And so, Ellen, I'm actually just taking your statement as feedback and a reminder as we do our work, and also affirm that the reason why we talk about social isolation with students is so that they can understand in their environment that there are young people that are being socially isolated. We want them to have that, that level of consciousness.
So, Crystal, for us at New York City SEFT, you're welcome, Ellen. And feel free to stay with us if you want to, Ellen, because I know you're a big voice in New York City for our kids, especially our kids with special needs. So to Ellen's point, Crystal, because, as a former teacher myself, right, we love to talk about, teachers have to be, the safety agents, the doctors, the mental health professional, and then they have to know their content areas. And it's really tough. So in terms of training, so that teachers can recognize those signs and then can make the appropriate connections for either the victims or potential victims or the perpetrators. What goes into that, and how do we ensure that teachers are really being trained properly and are taking that work to heart and making it really intrinsic to their work?
Yeah. So I'm going to take the first part of that question, Farah. When we train educators on knowing the signs, we really try to make it very simple, right? There are a lot of frameworks out there that are very complex, but there's like 3 steps. If you visually see someone by themselves, right? And you just imagine when you're in a classroom, to your point, you have to be everything to everyone. But it is the observation that we're trying to help educators understand, and we actually have them practice, right? Like, who did you miss in your environment? We have a PSA called Evan. And this PSA is phenomenal because you're missing the signs of someone who is clearly saying, I need help, and then something happens. So we spend a lot of time there. And I know that that is so simple, but what we're trying to do is unnormalize what has been normalized, and in that young people have either been isolated by others or they self-isolated. So we spend a lot of time there. We talk a lot about how adults can become trusted adults so that young people can actually reach out and help. And, one of the questions I asked when I first came on board was, are we assuming that all adults are trusted adults for young people, right? And so our team is really working on practices to help an adult understand what's the role and the responsibility, right? And so making it tangible. So when you're in a staff meeting, like, put every kid up on the board, right? You put 5, you put 5, you put 5. Okay, put a star next to that kid who we know has someone. And then you take a look and say, like, oh, we probably have the same stars on the same 5 kids, right? So we spend a lot of time in that space. And then we talk a little bit about, like, how do educators help young people start with hello? I think one of the things that's going to be critical is creating spaces where educators can talk with one another, like a cohort model. So as we're thinking about the Bronx, right? So if we look at effective teacher practices across all different types of studies, we know that when teachers create community around practice, that you see outcomes improve. And so we know that as we are helping educators know the signs, we want them to be in community together. We want them to talk about their challenges related to doing this, about observing, about being a trusted adult, and start to exchange practices. And so it is a model that we're designing, and we'll look at how effective that is. But I think building a sense of community at the educator level is helpful. And I would say that I would be remiss if I didn't. We recognize that we ask teachers to take on additional responsibilities, right? So even in our Safe Promise Clubs and working with schools, we're like, oh, we need you to now be a Safe Promise Club advisor. And so we're starting to say, is that an equitable practice, and how can we support, right? What are the ways that we can support folks? We're making an additional ask by supporting them so that they can actually be present in that space and show up for young people. So that's one area we'll dig into. I won't go into the detail there, but I think prioritizing equity as we think about educators is something that's very much on top for us, particularly with the challenges that educators are facing right now.
Right, because I think, to your point, it has to become something of a culture, right? Part of the school culture, part of the way educators do their jobs, because otherwise I think we run into the potential of educators saying, that's not part of my job, that's not part of the contract. I am not
Right.
paid to do this. I'm paid to teach math or social studies, and I'm not, I'm not paid to look for the signs of this and that, because I'm not a mental health expert. I didn't go to school for psychology. So how
Right.
do you combat that? Because I assume that, especially when the policy, right, because we at New York City South, we engage a lot in terms of changing policy. When the rule and the laws are not written in such a way that says, as an educator, you must, right? That's part of your job. Then how do you combat a resistant educator, in the classroom, or a principal or a superintendent that's just looking at, you know what, this is too much for me. I'm just here to teach math. I'm just here to teach science. Leave me alone. How do you help that educator see the light, so to speak?
Oh, Sarah, that is such a hard question. Okay, I'm gonna take some angles to this. So we have local champions in communities. They're called Promise Leaders. They are comprised of teachers, parents, caregivers, volunteers. I mean, they're community members, right? Who advocate for, to your point, this culture change that we're designing for. And we know culture change is about policies and practices and standards, right? And so all across the country, we have mobilized folks who are going to PTA meetings, right? Who are sitting at board meetings, who are saying, these are the types of supports that we need to have in place. And a lot of our partnerships with schools have been established on the strength of the work that Promise Leaders are doing in their local community, their advocacy, their influence to say, we have to do this. This is a priority, just like these other three things. And they push and they push and they push. There are a group of parents right now doing that in several different areas. I don't want to name specifics, but that is a really important lever. And I think that's why I was leaning in so hard to the power of community, because I think that's the lever that you pull. In terms of the tactics, we know that when we train school-wide, so our trainings are usually done in an assembly style where there's like the student body and the teacher body, and we just like ask all the teachers, everybody just come in the space, right? We have shown that model is effective, right? Because it saturates an entire school building, right? Now, is that culture change by itself? No, but there is something to the fact that when in school has a shared experience, it's like any group, when you have a shared experience, it starts to shift the things that you see. And so that is kind of core to our model in terms of saturating. So I think you have to think about what are the structures in place, right, outside of the school that come in and say, this is important, we need to prioritize this, that kind of community voice, that parent and caregiver voice as a lever for that policy, practice, culture change. And then our model in terms of bringing together the student body and the entire teacher body. Now, I think there are some critical things that are necessary. Leader buy-in. The leader, and that there's leaders at all levels, right? But whoever is in charge, it is so important for them to even name that safety is a priority. Safety is a commitment. Safety is a value, and having some things that are done over. So in staff meetings, whatever that 1 or 2 lines reminder about safety and its importance in that district, having that being part of the ethos, right? And so we have a lot of different examples, and it is, you know, they're not all made equal. But we know that when you engage kind of these local advocates and you engage them at the right levels in a district, when you do these kind of school-wide saturated moments, and then when you have small kind of reinforcing practices like the leader, the person at the top, reinforcing the commitment, and then how staff meetings are run, how you're thinking about what happens in a building, that's when we start to see the type of change. But Farah, to your point, there are so many layers you have to pull. And I think having the conversation about what we're trying to do together to then make sure that those levers are all deployed under the same directional vision cannot be understated because, you know, then we're not, you know, all don't have an eye towards what safety means. And I want to go back to Ellen's point. You got to be aligned around something, right? Or we're going to do harm and isolate folks who need the policies and the practices the most.
Thank you for that, Ellen. I mean, not Ellen, but Ellen too. Jennifer, Amy, anything you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to know, I think a lot of us here, I think if not all of us here are serve on our community education councils and are in direct contact with our superintendents regularly. So, and I'm sitting here wondering why is District 21 not, you know, having a partnership with Sandy Hook? And so I'm curious as to what the process is. How does that, what is it? Are there costs? How do we initiate it? Like, what can I go back to my CEC next week and talk about?
So what we do is we make sure that cost is not a barrier, that there is no cost to schools. And so we have an amazing team. They advocate, they do this work every day, and they rally together so that we can do the work across schools. Jennifer, we just need to give you some information. I mean, literally the way that partnerships come to us, they come to us by connection, right? They come to us because an individual says, we need this done, and they make a call. And we want to do everything that we can for as many districts across New York City because we know that we are one part of the solution, but we want to be shoulder to shoulder. So it really is you all making the connection and us understanding, you know, what are the ways that we can support.
Is there a reason why the Department of Education themselves has not? I mean, do we know if this conversation taking place? Because it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I know that there are many conversations that happen at different levels. In some states, we are partnered, you know, with different state agencies. I know that in the New York BOCES, we're starting a partnership in a couple of the regions for our Say Something Anonymous reporting system. So I think it is about, you know, making sure that, you know, what is the right entry point, right? For us, sometimes it is district by district. Sometimes it is DOE. I think we've seen so many examples of how we partner. We even partner with some at the state agency level, and so we're able to kind of scale throughout the state. But you all know best the layers of challenge that exist to permeate certain levels. And so I think it is saying, like, what is, you know, the urgency of now, what is the right level for the context. But, you know, again, you know, we're here, and I think having this initial conversation was where we wanted to start, to see what districts we can support, you know, especially as we enter into the D9.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is that we're having this conversation, because what we don't want to do is have the conversation after a tragedy and be like, we should have done more before, you know. I mean, because everybody, you know, like you said, there's a school where you can identify, in every school, in every classroom, there is something, a flag. There's something that after the fact, people always say, everybody will agree, oh yes, that was a very, you know, it's rare that you'll hear, oh, they were always such a, you know, I don't know. I want to work beforehand. I want to get it. I want to do proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah. And Jennifer, there was a news headline, and I mean, it was sometime, I think it was over the summer. No, it was before school got out. And it was about a young person who made a signal, and there was a shooting outside of the school, high school age. And that stuck with me. That headline stuck with me because we missed something, right? Like, how many signals, how many nonverbals, the undercode are we not reading? And I think that's why young people understanding their culture and how they're creating language is so important. And we're missing that, right? Because they're communicating in a way that starts to not help us get to the right level of intervention. And it makes me nervous. My daughter is 7, and sometimes she'll say something, and I'm like, what does that mean? Right? And so I just think that, you know, I don't want to miss anything. And I think the more that we can do this programming work, and then use the youth leadership lever to partner with you to then understand, like, how is this manifesting, or what are we missing so that we can improve programming, is what we want to do. So that's what I'll say there.
Amy, any question or?
Wow. I have a long list of them. Violence in communities is something that hits really home for me. Crystal, I am from the Bronx. I'm actually in the home district of District 10 in the Northwest Bronx. So we, you know, it's a really constant issue. Like, it's become more of a norm now that, you know, shootings are happening around our youth, around schools, around the community, in the neighborhoods. And a lot of part of this is due to pandemic, you know, the loss of 2 years, and a lot of the mental health, right? Like, in the county of the Bronx, like, the healthcare system itself, not just with COVID, but services of really retaining social workers and psychologists to really evaluate, you know, the trauma, the grievances that are happening. I think one of the things that we think early childhood trauma is like, oh, kids can get through it. Like, you know, they will really reflect too much on emotions because it's just their kids, right? Like, they really understand. But, you know, through this last 2 years, you know, there was a shooting in the beginning of the school year last year at Harry Truman High School in Co-op City in the Bronx. 2 shootings after school on the same week. And then you have other shootings around the city, one you didn't expect in Staten Island, right? And so you hear stories of kids coming into buildings with a backpack full of guns, and even getting through metal detectors. And I think, you know, it's a scary as a parent, but also, you know, any student that's going to school thinking, oh my gosh, like, you know, I thought that it would be a safe haven for me to go to school and get educated, but now it's like, how do I kind of go through this on top of what I'm already dealing with, which is like a lot of the communities are dealing with bullying and teasing in class, right? So there's a lot of mental health, I think, we're all dealing with on top of just a lot of distress. For me and for my 17-year-old, I actually have 5 kids and they're all in school now from elementary to middle school and high school. But my 17-year-old who is multiple disabled and has autism, he was very traumatized by January 6th with everything that's being displayed in the media. And something like that, it hits home. Like, it's not just a story, but it's like, oh my gosh, that's part of the memory. And to relate every news factor of what we're going right now, it's like they feel no one's really supporting. We are as parents, we are as supporters of the community, but it's not enough. So I just guess, not to go on a tangent, but like legislatively, how can or what has Sandy Hook been doing to make sure that our elected officials are also on board and making sure that they hear not just from families and not just from victims themselves, but like our youth, our youngsters, like, because this is their community, this is their future, this is their life. And it will affect a lot. So just curious, it's like what is in the process of Sandy Hook Promise, as well as all the supporters and sponsors that support community and violence.
Yeah. Amy, first of all, thank you for that, because you layered on all the complexity. So we have our C4, our policy team, and they have been doing a lot of work. And so earlier I mentioned our vision and mission are couched in 3 areas: schools, homes, and communities. And so we have an amazing federal and state policy team that are looking at legislative model policy in those 3 dimensions, right? And so the Safe Students Act really prioritizes mental health supports and trainings in schools. And we've been very successful with supporting that model policy in several states. We also, and I don't want to get into too many details, but other policies related to extreme risk protection orders, other model policies about lockdown drills, and what are the practices that are not effective, that are traumatizing, and talking about trauma-informed practice, right? Because we know that there are a lot of requirements for hardening. And so our policies are really trying to prioritize the outliers, right? To make sure that practices are not doing more harm than good. And so our team is out every day trying to lift up some of these topics in communities while working with legislators at the state and at the federal level. But I do want to say that one of the reasons why we've had a lot of success is for the importance of the legislative action, right? And so we know that is very much a part of the culture change. And we talked about that earlier a little bit, but I hope that, Amy, gives you.
Yeah, and I also just want to also just what my feedback is in the many schools that as a CEC member have seen and participated, that safety plans in school are supposed to be public documents for the community. And apparently here in the DOE, they don't really share, like it seems like a secret society of like, some of these undisclosed documents of like what a safety plan looks like for a school, and every school is different, right? And every building is shaped differently, and the size of population of students and the types of students. And it saddens me to know, like, parents or even just leaders who are on parent associations and parent teacher associations that are not a part of these safety plans, or not even aware, or not even aware of the most updated version, because I actually got one recently that was like 2015 to 2016, and that was actually the most updated version from the Adante incident, who's a young man who had left school and was found later hours in the day at the Long Island Sound, and who was a high school student with ASD. And so that was years ago. And to see that the DOE not kind of liberally share out to schools, to individual parents, like, this is our safety plan up to date with the circumstance we're dealing with now, like soft lockdowns, hard lockdowns, any incidents. Like, I had myself a situation last week with one of my high schoolers who had a soft lockdown at dismissal time, like right before dismissal time. I had no communication. The only way I actually found out was from Citizens app. And when I had called a school, no one was in the office. And I called everybody. Like, I literally called everybody just to find out what's going on, what happened to my kid, where's my kid, is it the block in front of my school was safe, like, what was happening? And I had no answer. I got the answer the next day, but still, like, this was something I feel not just a local level issue. It's really on a New York State education issue, and I'm sure there's others, cities that are similar in the situation. But
Can I piggyback off of that? What you just said, Amy,
Sure.
about the parents not knowing. And I mentioned this to Crystal before we started talking. I don't know if you can see, maybe if I put it in front of my face. Nope, you can't see it. I got a lock and hold flyer from my kid's school today, only because I went into the office to pick something up, paperwork for his IEP. And it's about what is a lock and hold as opposed to a complete, lockdown, right? But the way that they have it broken down, it's for what students, teachers, and staff do. And nowhere, this is not distributed to parents. So how can I speak to my child when he asks me questions about, he literally asked me last week, what is a hold? What is like, he was asking me, I don't have this information. There's like this complete lack of transparency and communication, where how can I help keep my kids safe if I don't even know what they're doing to keep my kids safe?
When we work with school districts on our Say Something Anonymous reporting system, when we're training and onboarding a district, we require them to have a school team and a district team, right? And they are obviously the response team, but we talk about the need for messaging and communication. It's actually one practice that we really, really, really focus in on, because when we're dealing with a life safety event, we need to make sure that whomever answers the phone at the school understands we're calling for a reason. This is a life safety event. And I bring that up because there is fragmentation in communication. It is necessary that there is a level of structure, practice that helps parents understand here's a safety plan. So I think that's something that, when I think about our promise leaders, it's a topic that we can take, right? Again, national movement of individuals influencing and advocating for real issues. I think that's one thing that, Amy, I'm gonna take back in a couple of different ways. But when I think about the power of community mobilization, that's one, right? That kind of grassroots bottom up. And I also think that making sure there's some influence around the types of practices, like sharing a safety plan at specific times of the year, knowing that they change, is necessary. Because you even think about parent and caregiver strategies, right? School districts have, parent engagement and everything. And part of parent engagement is being a good partner. And we can't be good partners, right? I include myself in that because I'm a mommy. We can't be good partners if we don't have the information. And so I think that we have fragmentation. I think this is ringing for me. We got parent and caregiver engagement over here. You got safety over here. You got socio-emotional development over here. And there are some things that should be consistent, right, about all of those initiatives or efforts. And I think that we could do some interesting work to say, like, if you have a parent and caregiver engagement strategy, you should also talk about safety and whatever the lockdown processes and drills are. I have a question. Can I pose a question to this team? Okay. So how, are you all invited to the table to do co-action planning? Like, what is that? Because it feels like that, Amy, what you just raised up is like, that should be like a co-shaped plan, bringing stakeholders together. I mean, it's continuous quality improvement. So I'm just wondering how you all are engaged in those types of planning processes.
I am so sorry,
as NYCC.
Rima. Right. I'm so sorry that Rima had to leave, because I think Rima would have had a lot to say on this in terms of the way parents are not invited to the table when it comes to safety plans and how to really support not only their own kids, but the community and the school itself. But before we get deeper into that, because I do have some questions around community engagement in terms of safety and parent engagement in terms of safety, I'd like to take a question from Marie Deplaisir. So Carla, if you can help Marie ask her question, please. Thank you. Marie, the floor is yours.
Hi, Marie, you just have to unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. So in the interest of time, because I guess maybe she's, I don't know. But in terms of that, because at New York City SEF, and I think I can speak for all the CECs, that we believe, right, safety in itself is not just a school issue, it's a community issue, right? Just like education is a community issue, right? It's a family issue, because we expect, okay, Marie says she's not able to unmute. Carla, can you help her unmute,
yes,
please?
she's currently unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Marie. I'll ask after you. Marie, you're muted, but we can't hear you. Okay, so as we wait, Marie, feel free to interrupt me. Carla, please help her out. And so, because we know, right, for example, if as a mother, as a father, you don't help your child to learn the colors and the numbers and the, ABCs and so on and so forth, by the time they get to school, right, they are at least 18 months behind or so, right? So I am not understanding how is it that we can have safety plans when it comes to schools, and we are not invited parents to sort of be part of the solution in terms of making sure, number one, to look for signs in case your child can be the child that is a perpetrator, right? Because no one is immune to this, right? No matter how great of a parent you are, your child can be that child. And then if your child is going to be on the side of the victims, well, how can you help your child look for signs that, this peer over here, this friend of mine over here may actually be dangerous to me and the rest of my class, the rest of my peers? And how is it? Because in New York City, we have a serious situation where a lot of the educators do not live in New York City. A lot of the superintendents do not live in New York City. In the Bronx, a lot of those teachers don't live in the Bronx. A lot of the superintendents don't live in the Bronx. They live in Connecticut, in New Jersey, upstate New York. So, which means that they don't, just by nature, they don't understand certain things about the community in which they work. Yet, the people who may understand, meaning those mothers, those fathers, those grandmothers, those uncles, that neighbor, right, are not invited to be part of that plan, to know anything about it, to bring ideas to it, to be a support system. Because you know what? Besides calling the police, maybe you can have parents around the schools, inside the schools, teaching, monitoring, conversing, looking out. There's a lot that can be done, but none of that is happening. And I'd like to know, because you're not the DOE, so maybe I'm posing the question wrong, but how, in your plan, in terms of Sandy Hook, can you help New York City and us in the Bronx and throughout the city? Because as you can see, we all from New York City here, not just from the Bronx. Make that happen. And I'm glad, and sorry for that. And I'm glad Rima is here because she can share something right after you answer that, and then Marie ask her questions, and then we'll pass it to Rima.
So for me, as we develop a relationship, right, with any district in New York City, right, that conversation, the series of conversations that happen before we even start doing any implementation is so important. And for us, we're asking the question, who are the community-based partners? It's one of the, I saw a little person. Who are the community-based partners that are doing this work? It was one of the first things that our team did when we were like, oh, well, we have an opportunity to work with the Bronx. Because we knew that there are folks who are in the community leading safe passage programs, right? There's a lot of work being done. And the first question for us is, how do we bring them to the table with us as we're putting together whatever plan is going to be in place? So for us, it's part of how we establish relationships. I can only speak for our pursuits here in New York City, but I think that we've seen so many examples across the country that when you're engaging folks who, at the community level in your work, your intervention is more effective. So we know that. But I think it is about creating that space. Oftentimes, when you're just trying to implement a program, you're just trying to implement a program, right? And so that conversation about who else do we need to bring to the table, sometimes that data is not connected for us. We're asking that question and we're interested. And Farah, I think that's why I appreciated you opening this space for us, because you all are really an important community voice and we want to be in partnership doing this work, right? So as we continue to expand and do work in other districts, make sure we're asking the question, right? Like, what's the safety plan and who else created it and how can we all kind of, come together? So again, I think it's our commitment and a key takeaway from this conversation, Farah, but definitely work. And it's a little disconcerting for me to hear that those plans are not co-created and shared.
Well, let me just add
Thank
one
you.
thing. Just 2
Hold
seconds.
on, Amy, because let's be fair to Marie for 1 minute. Marie, can you hear us and can you speak now?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Finally. Thank you. I was not promoted and I was like, I do not see the mic. I'm not able to say anything. But yes, thank you for that, Farah. And so I there's been, Farah, you had mentioned and said quite a few things I wanted to bring up. And so we are having nonstop conversation. We're creating that community that Ms. Garrant had just, spoken about. But it's not just within, the conversation on public safety. We're talking about creating, um, investing in upstream solution that would have positive results. Um, and I think in terms of safety right now, not just the fact that it's happening in the schools, which is really, really sad, not in New York City, but across the country. However, um, within our communities, No one is safe. No one is safe at this point. Let's not say, oh, not in my community or not in my borough. It is happening everywhere. What is the investment and having upstream solution that would have positive result that would reduce not just only gun violence within our, because what's happening within these families' homes, um parents really do not know how to handle that, because you have your children, they're out there, you want them to be safe. Unfortunately, you're saying that parents are arming their children. Yes, they are. We have not spoken about that. The reason why they're able to gain access, have these weapons of violence, guns, and taking it to school, because they want to protect themselves. They're afraid of getting to school. You don't know once you leave your home how you're getting back. And it's the same how families are feeling at this point. If my child goes to school, we don't have that um, creating that safe space, that safety that we're looking for, that these our students are protected within the school building. So conversations, yes, ongoing. It is happening with various groups that want to see changes. However, we need upstream solution that would have positive results, and not just within the school building, but within the community, the school community, as well. So, with that being said, what is being done? The conversation is great, ongoing conversation, but we're looking into um, having positive results, not just that would reflect on our kids, but everyone has to be on board. Everyone has to be on the same page. And that's it on my end. Farah, back to you.
Yeah, Marie. It's deep, right? I didn't send my kids to school on Halloween because I was scared. I didn't. I'm sorry. Crystal, I'm going to let you answer that while I compose myself, because it's a real fear.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Farah. So I'm just going to answer as an individual citizen who lives in community. I think we have Marie, we have so many solutions and policies and things. And my question is, are we getting to the core of the issue? Right? And I know I spoke about it earlier in like this whole iceberg, but the reason why people are scared in community is because there's scarcity in community and there's competition over resources and there's not enough, and there are all of these compounded factors. And I think I don't know what the breakthrough innovative solution is. The public-private solution, but I do know that just addressing this issue from one angle is not enough, because there's such levels of complexity. You cannot talk about this without talking about poverty. You cannot talk about this without talking about racism and classism and ableism. You cannot talk about it. And so I would just, I guess my, reminder to myself, my call to action to folks who live in community is that it's great that we have our affinity groups and we're talking about and we're working around a particular issue. And the challenge is how do you bring those things together and start to say what would be the best innovation that could, I'm not gonna say eradicate, but start to chip away, because folks are scared. I'm from the South Side of Chicago, lived in Detroit. I'm a Midwest girl through and through. And when I go home and I'm driving in the car, I just cannot wait to get on the other side and the outskirts of the South suburbs, because I'm scared of what might happen with the strays, right? Broad daylight, fearful. And so I bring that up to just, we all bring our own humanity to the situation. And just because we, work for organizations or systems doesn't mean that we all are not deeply touched. And it's the deeply touched organizer in me that wants to talk to the folks who are working on housing insecurity or whatever the issues are, to say, how do we partner? It's my best, it's my best thought right now, in terms of Marie, what you've spoken to. But just doing one side isn't enough in the complexity that exists in communities.
Thank you for that. And I want you to know that at New York City South, Marie, we are committed not only to the conversations, but changing policy, because that's what we're all about. It's like we have conversations to build the army that's going to pressure those elected officials to change those policies, because we are all playing games here. If we think it's just a conversation, the policy has to change, the monies have to be invested, the communities have to be educated. And honestly, we just have to bring back community in the sense, I remember when I was a kid, granted, I was born here, but I wasn't raised here all my childhood. But I hear other people talking about it, where, if you're misbehaving in school or in the neighborhood, your parents knew before you got home. You understand? Yep. And there is a part for community to play, for parents to play. And for me, it feels like beyond the policy, we need to take back our communities, and we need to take back our schools, and we need to take back our children, because too many of them are, in gangs and and hurting themselves and hurting each other. What pushes a child to think that the solution is to hurt, another child? It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's the purpose of the conversation, to make sense of it. So Rima, if you don't mind, I'll let you share your experience with trying to bring community into that space, the conversation for school safety and community safety that I know you were so unhappy with. Can you hear us, Rima? Okay. Carla, can you find out what's going on with Rima so maybe she can speak?
Farah, what you just said about community and one of the comments in the chat I just saw go by about it takes a village, but we don't have villages in our communities anymore. And yes, things are, pardon me, dire in New York City right now. But I have to tell you, as someone who grew up in the suburbs in Coral Springs, right next to Parkland, my high school, the students of the freshman class when I graduated my senior year were the first class of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. It's school violence for me is deeply personal, and I can tell you that in South Florida, where I live, if you knew your neighbor's name, it was weird. I lived next door to people for 15 years. I couldn't tell you the first thing about them. Maybe in other parts of the country that's different, but particularly, when you see these violent gun tragedies happen, and they're in these places that you don't really think about in those terms, right? These very, very small town, or I feel like there's just this kind of just closed offness. And the thing that struck me most when I moved to Brooklyn was how much community really we have. There's hope, I feel, in New York City, because I really do. I could tell you everything about my neighbors, probably too much, like I never had that in Florida. And I feel like there's that kind of vestiges of we're all in this together, and we all need to work together because we're literally living on top of each other. There are barriers that maybe we have an advantage that perhaps the other parts of the country don't have. So I just want to offer that little ray of hope, because I feel very strongly that where I grew up, it's just siloed. I could get away with a lot of stuff before anybody would even catch me out there where I lived. So, but my son does
Okay.
not have that opportunity. I tell you right now, my kid's out there acting up, I'm going to hear about it.
Right. So we have Rima who wants to speak for a minute, but so I'm going to agree with you and Ellen and disagree at the same time, right? Because what it means is that it's uneven, right? There are places where people are building communities, and there are places where it's non-existent, and that's within the city itself, and within individual boroughs, right? So you have a situation in the Bronx, and believe you me, I do believe on certain levels that the community does exist, because then it's like in certain parts of the Bronx, for example, we would be all wiped out, right? If there wasn't some type of community. At the same time, you have so much violence going on that people don't really trust each other. So they don't really speak to each other. You know, so it's possible that you have both extremes existing at the same time. But I can tell you, part of the reason that it's so rampant is because whatever community that's happening, wherever it's happening, it's not enough. Because if it were enough, we wouldn't be dealing with the types of problems that we are dealing with. So then how do we bring, for the communities that are building community, right? And the churches, as Ellen pointed out, there are churches out there doing the work and schools doing the work. How do we magnify that work, and how do we amplify it so that it becomes the norm and not the exception or the thing that is rare that everybody is still looking for? But with that, Rima, go ahead, because Rima said she had her hand up for like 20 minutes. Can you hear me, Rima?
Yes, hi, good evening. Sorry, it caught me like in the middle of dinner really quick before. Um, I'm really happy we're talking about safety plans, and I know that was like from 20 minutes ago, but the safety plans are really important. And I think that there's a lot of nuances about the safety plan, safety committee, building response team that people don't understand. And having those meetings and reading those documents help us to advocate for things that make more sense, so when things do happen, that the response is better. And you know, everything is about response, and then when things happen, we learn and we do better next time, you know, but the cost of learning sometimes is too high. And so I think that giving the education of safety and how to advocate for these plans, for these spaces. You know, there's supposed to be, in at least in New York City, an annual town hall for these safety committees, for the whole public, the building to come together, that campus to come listen and learn and ask questions and speak. And I find that those spaces don't always happen. And if they do, the whole community is not invited. You know, there's always a coordinator, right, or a chairperson. And you know, if that person is from a specific school, that community may get it, but each community may not. And you know, I know that, I think Ellen earlier mentioned about special education and students that need more or have different needs. And you know, I gotta be honest, we're really not considered in those safety plans. And, you know, we have co-located schools with hundreds of students in it and thousands of students on campus. And to not have to not have something in the plan about how people in wheelchairs or motor chairs get out the building in a school that services a great population of individuals with disabilities. And that's not just the students, right? Because teachers can have disabilities too. And it's really, and that's the other side of it, is that access is a barrier for everyone. You know how many disabled teachers can't work wherever they want because the schools are not accessible, you know, or God forbid, it's like, yeah, it's partially accessible. Cool. What's going to happen in a fire drill? You know, they're going to have that room where they put people that have wheelchairs. And then, you know, that's the room that they come up the ladder and they save you from, maybe, you know, maybe. And that stinks, you know, that, and again, poor planning in these committees and on these plans and in these spaces is our power to amplify and magnify the needs of these communities so that they can start to plan for these needs to be met, and then we can need regular stuff like everybody else and not basic stuff that everyone else gets. So I think that it's a great contribution to talk about the safety plans and empower parents to understand. And because Ellen study, I'm going to read it. No, people don't know a lot of things, and that's another thing, is that we have a lot of students that have circulation issues or weight issues or diet issues, and look, a lot of the time it's medication, right? Our kids take medication and side effect is the increase in weight, and so now they have circulation issues from the medication that they're taking for their disability, and like the plan is leave them in a room. So I just worry for our communities, and I encourage everyone to learn more and ask more questions and ask to be in more spaces and talk to your, community partners, right? As somebody else said, CVOs and community-based partners, right? Not CVOs, but the police, the precinct councils, community affairs, because they're the other side of the coin. And it's not a coin, I guess, because it's multi-sided, right? But like a prism maybe. And exactly, FDNY. And I've even done Con Edison. And you can call and kind of let people know, hey, we have people with disabilities here, so that when an emergency happens, that's flagged on your address, and I have another project I dreamt up like 5 hours ago at school that I'm gonna work on with NYPD. But just how do you help our kids or our individuals when they need help with their limited skills? Because when your skills are limited and their skills are limited, how do I ask you for help? So I just want to elevate and thank everybody for touching on those things.
Thank you so much, Rima. Crystal, anything to add to respond? Or?
just so many hearts. I think Sarah, you said it. We're having a conversation for action, and I think one of the powerful themes that came out tonight was mobilizing around the safety plans. It feels real actionable. It's especially this, when I think about safety and what's required of students, I think about our littles, right? So little people who are early education, and they're coming into a context and they're experiencing all of this for the first time. I always think about that. And I think that we owe it to those littles who are entering formal school to understand what's happening, so that their parents can understand, that they can talk to them. Because imagine you come from wherever you come from, private daycare with grandma, whatever, into a system that you don't understand, right? So I feel like there's so many reasons why this conversation around safety planning, understanding the committee, having these conversations, and making it a campaign. I'm always like, what can we make a campaign? When I worked in youth development, I was like, can we, for the first month, just build connection? Can we not do any program? We're just going to build connection. I mean, the same thing is true for safety, right? Like, we should have key times of the year where we're looking at safety all together, and it's a priority because it is an expectation. And there's just so much that folks don't know that they should know. So just one of my takeaways, Sarah, from this conversation. And I'm just trying to think about what is the action on the other side of that.
Well, thank you for that. So I think we have about 5 minutes left, unless, people have more questions and you are available to stay a little bit more. But I guess my question, since we talked about community, we talked about parents, but we didn't really talk about the young people themselves. Because I think the young people, they play a part in this, right? Because the truth is, they know each other more than we know them. And like you were saying before, they have their own language that we don't always understand, and they are creating that language every day. So for parents and for educators and for people who just interact with kids all the time, what is the best way, or what are the things that you're working on in terms of accessing the minds and the hearts of those young people so that they can help us find the solutions? Because after all, they are both at times the perpetrators and the victims. So it seems to me that there has to be a conversation amongst them as well. And then they have to be conversing with us. So yeah, help me understand what the approach is on that.
So core to our model are our SAVE Promise Clubs. They're youth leadership clubs. So when we work with the school district, we train educators, we train students, and we help districts set up a SAVE Promise Club. It's a small leadership club, you know, and they could be large too. We have some individual school buildings that have multiple SAVE clubs, but they have one advisor who works with them throughout the year. And what they do is they keep the message alive, right? So a SAVE club might do an open mic. So know the signs, three signs, right? See someone alone, say something, right? These very simple messages. And they do campaigns throughout the year. It could be an open mic, it could be a poster contest, it could be whatever. But the idea and the model is for young people to be leading so that their peers get to interact more often, more frequently, and they're really positioned as the leaders. Part of the thing that we've done, particularly with our youth advisory board, is help them understand the kind of legislative conversations, right? The legislative topics, because to this conversation, where we see change is through policy. And so we help our youth advisory board understand kind of the key policy topics that are necessary relative to gun violence and violence prevention. So that is also important, right? So it's not only giving skills for young people to lead the topic itself and the content, but allowing them to actually understand how you make change, right? So beyond the school building, beyond the service learning project, we want them to be able to have the agency and the autonomy. So it is, we talk about how do you sustain a program in a school district. There are a number of things that help to sustain, but to say the youth leadership component is for us a core component of that.
Thank you so much for that. And I think Ellen had one question. Ellen, do you want to ask your question? You can unmute yourself.
Does the youth advisory, Does the youth advisory board include individuals with disabilities, somebody who's deaf, somebody who's blind, somebody who uses a wheelchair? And just as a side note, next time when you do this, could you turn on the closed captioning button?
Definitely. That's well, the first part is for you, Crystal, and the second part is for us at New York City Surf. And yes, we did answer you in the chat, Ellen. We absolutely will do that. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Crystal.
So Ellen, yes, we have young people in our National Youth Advisory Council that have a range of abilities. And so we open up the application so that it is not restricted. And when we do in-person planning sessions, we make sure that there are accommodations of all kinds. And so our team prioritizes that.
Thank you. You've got to be one of the example. You've got to be one of the few places they can actually say yes.
Yeah, we and I won't get into the practices, but I had an opportunity to go to our to their planning summit. We get our youth advisory board together to plan out the program year, right? They lead different activities for all the SAVE Promise clubs throughout the year. And there were several of them that needed accommodations. And Ellen, what was so powerful is you could see them like not give a whole lot of rise or negative attention to the accommodations. They just support whatever needed to be in place. And so it says something about trusting young people enough to connect, to show care, and to show empathy with one another. So there are a couple powerful moments in there that reinforce this kind of, this truly is in an inclusive space. Yes. Yes. Yep. Give me a couple seconds, okay? Okay.
Okay, there goes the little one saying, "Mommy, I need you now." Okay, so we will let you go soon, but one last question. In New York City, there is this whole debate on how to keep the schools safe, and some parents and some activists are actually proposing the locking down of the buildings, meaning that once the kids are in and the staff are busy doing their work, just close the door, lock it up, and somehow we will be safe. I'm wondering if Sandy Hook Promise has any thoughts on that.
So we have some guidance about when it comes to lockdowns and drills, what's trauma informed, right? And it's all of the good inclusion and best practices. I think we say that we have to do what's best for young people and for educators, and it has to be a conversation, right? It's similar to when we were talking about having safety plans, that those ideas can't be in isolation of decisions made here, and it impacts everyone and no one has a say. I think we want people to evaluate the data in their community. We want them to look at best practice. We want to think about who are you serving in your building, and you have to bring all of those things together to make the right decision. However, we have a set of recommendations for what is trauma informed, as to not do more harm than good, and that is really our stance. It is a complicated topic when it comes to hardening and lockdowns, and we recognize that the trauma and the re-traumatization that happens when you do that. So it has to be a carefully constructed decision, and lots of decision points have to be considered.
Hey, thank you so much for that, Crystal. But one last question, because we don't want to be unfair to Emma. Emma said she had her hand up and she's logged in under somebody else's name and she wants to get her question out. Emma, please get your question out. Thank you so much, Crystal, for staying just a few more minutes. Emma? Emma, we don't hear you. Carla, can you help us with Emma? Because I don't know what's happening.
The name that Emma is under is
Marie.
Unmuted, so I'm not sure if she may be having technical difficulties on her side.
Marie, can you help us with Emma's question? Or can Emma put it in the chat?
She's the one with the other pic with the guy playing the piano and the kids. That's the one. She just typed in the chat.
She is unmuted.
Right, she's unmuted, but yet we
Okay.
don't hear her.
All right, so Emma, you need to unmute.
We still don't hear you, Emma. Do you want to put it in the chat and then we'll read it? Yeah, Carla, can you unmute both Maries?
Both are unmuted.
Well, there's one on my screen that looks like it's muted. Now both are muted.
That is on her side, so I guess she's unable to join us at the moment, and she can put her question in the chat as we are live.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but I guess we'll give it any final thoughts, and if Emma is able to ask her question, we'll take it. If not, we'll forward it to Crystal. But Crystal,
Okay.
any last thoughts?
I just want to say thank you first for again creating a space and allowing me to come on behalf of Sandy Hook Promise. I would say that we're here to partner with you, and we don't know everything, but we know that prevention work is community organizing work. And in order to successfully partner with any district, we're going to need the strength of community organizations like yours, so that there has to be parallel strategies. We can do the educator training and the programming, but the policy work, the advocacy, the mobilizing work, the community work has to be embedded. We see that as part of a necessary formula. So I just want to extend my gratitude to you all. I was trying to see if Emma's question was going to come through. And a couple of key takeaways for me, just to recap. Ellen, I'm sitting with disability inclusion and what that means for safety plans, what that means for coordinated response. What does it mean for when we're getting to know a district, right? What do we need to understand? So I wanted to highlight that. Also taking away this safety plan piece. And while it's different everywhere, right? I feel like there's something actionable there that's really important for us to understand. And then here's the last thing that was said and wasn't said in this conversation, is that part of this is about healing work, right? We don't talk about the healing part enough. We go to the head and we miss the heart. And so I just want to recognize those organizations that actually do healing work and restorative work, and there's a place for that with regard to violence prevention. I would be remiss if I didn't call that out. So thank you. Oh, Farrah,
Thank you so much. That is so true. So go ahead, Emma, ask your question. Emma, you're on the phone, right? You're muted. I don't know. Okay, well, I don't know what's happening. Tech issues. Forgive us, audience, wherever you're watching us from. Okay, so thank you so much, Crystal, for this. I actually think this was a wonderful conversation, and I think it's the beginning of many, many conversations and many actions that we are going to be taking together. And
Sarah, I'm going to send you, I'm sorry to cut you off there. I'm going to send you some information. Jennifer, I know I mentioned Promise Leaders. I want to send you some other program information. And if we can be helpful in any of the conversations, just let me know. But Sarah, I'll send that to you to share out.
Okay, thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you everyone that came and participated. And you know what, for an event that we did not promote as well as we should have, because I wasn't feeling well all week, it was still a brilliant conversation. And thank you for those of you who came from outside of the Bronx to participate in this. It felt like we still had borough representation. So this was really good. And next time we'll do a better job of promoting it. Hopefully I won't be sick, and then we'll do a better job. But thank you so much, Crystal. This was very enjoyable. Thank you to you all, and we'll see you next time with other events still around safety, I think 2 weeks from now. And don't forget that we are in partnership with DreamYard. We will be screening a movie, and we'll let you know when the date for that will be, and it will be hybrid. So come in person or log on, on one of the, through a webinar or on our social media pages. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.